Captain Peter Cutsey, part 3 in the series of messages and unreliable airspeed. Angle of attack, disagree. Let's have a look at the QRH. The QRH says, condition, the angle of attack, disagree, alert indicates the left and right angle of attack vanes disagree. That checklist directs us to go to the airspeed unreliable checklist. The airspeed unreliable checklist has memory items. So don't be confused. You're not going to a checklist right away. You're going to have to perform the recall items. That's the way you're trained. So it will pay to know that AOA disagree, IAS disagree will direct you to the airspeed unreliable. Let's have a look at the IAS disagree. IAS disagree. Condition. The IAS disagree alert indicates the captain's and first officer's airspeed indications disagree. Go to the airspeed unreliable checklist on page 10.1. So in flight, you're actually going to be wasting precious time by going to the QRH with an IAS or AOA disagree. You should know by memory that both the AOA and the IAS disagree will take you here. Taking you here, you can't read the checklist until you've done the memory items. So you do the memory items. So basically, before you even open a book, if you're doing things properly under airmanship, if you get an AOA disagree or an IAS disagree, you go ahead and complete the memory functions. Autopilot, if engaged, disengage, auto throttle disengage, flight director switches both of them off, and set the following gear up, pitch, attitude, and thrust. Flaps extended, 10 degrees of pitch, 80% N1, flaps up, 4 degrees of pitch, 75% N1. Now remember, pilot flying disengages the autopilot, therefore he or she is in manual flight. So after the auto throttles is disengaged, both of those functions 1 and 2 are done together. Remember, as we discussed in the previous video with respect to numerically listed checklist items, they can be all done together. So the autopilot disengage, auto throttle disengage are simultaneous. Pilot flying calls for flight director switches off. And the pilot flying will set thrust and adjust pitch depending on flaps extended or flaps up. Now remember, these settings at high temperatures and heavy weights will give you a slight climb right after takeoff. At normal takeoff weights and temperatures, it will give you a climb, better than a slight climb. And at high altitude, at normal weights, you will actually experience a slight descent with the flaps up configuration, of course, at high altitude. So that's 4 degrees of pitch and 75% N1. That is reflected in the FCTM. So just recapping on those two messages. Now, if we go and have a look at these messages, AOA disagree. And let's have a look at the airplane. There's where it would be right here on the PFD. Let's go back to the FCOM. And it says It indicates the captain's and the first officer's angle of attack values disagree by greater than 10 degrees for more than 10 seconds. The alert is shown on both PFDs and does not indicate which one is erroneous. So you would get the same message on the captain's PFD and on the first officer's PFD. The AOA disagree alert logic is active when the airplane is above 400 feet RA. So on liftoff, if you had a problem with the angle of attack vanes, you're not going to know about the problem till you're at 400 feet. Now, if the AOA disagree alert is shown when descending through 400 feet RA, the alert remains till landing. The AOA disagree alert will not show on the HUD. That's something to remember. In an unreliable airspeed condition, use all available indications to determine a reliable airspeed. All available indications to determine a reliable airspeed. The AOA disagree alert only shows on the PFD, on both PFDs. So at the bottom of the captain's and at the bottom of the FOs in this position here. Incidentally, they're really tiny messages and hard to see. The other thing is they are not connected to the master caution. So you don't get a master caution or an oral alert with these messages. So very easily missed. Therefore, we as instructors emphasize that you fly your airplane. Fly your airplane is not engage the autopilot and autothrottles and take your eyes away from the flight instruments. You have to stay with a scan at all times. Mainly because you're not alerted to this. So it's very difficult to see. All right, so let's go to the IAS disagree message. Here it is. We talked about the AOA. Here's the IAS disagree message. And in the same location on at the bottom left corner of both PFDs. And actually it indicates that the captain's and first officer's airspeed values disagree by more than 5 knots for more than 5 seconds. The alert is shown on both PFDs and does not indicate which airspeed value is erroneous. Remember on the flight deck that you have 3 sets of flight instruments: the captain's PFD, the first officer's PFD, and the standby integrated standby flight display. You have pitch from the captain's IRS, and you have pedostatic, you have airspeed from the alternate pedostatic system, which is independent of the ADIRUs. Basically, what you're looking at is raw data. So, as in life, if you have a problem medically, you go to a doctor, you get an opinion. Then you go to a second doctor and get a second opinion. If they both agree, then finally you will make a decision to accept that. And what I'm saying here is that I'm comparing the captain's PFD to the ISFD and compare the first officer's primary flight display to the IFSD, the standby horizon. If the captains and the standby agree and the first officers don't, the captain's is a reliable indication. More than likely, if with the pitch references that we have set and the thrust that we have set, agree with the performance tables, and that's something you can do later on. You don't have time to get into performance tables immediately, but what you do have time to do immediately is to look up at, on the flight deck, to look up at we'll just zoom out a bit. So we have the captain's PFD, the standby, and the first officers. And remember, this is raw data, just like the old altimeters on the airplanes we flew 50, 60 years ago. We didn't have computers then. So if captain and standby match perfectly, a good place to start, captain should be pilot flying. First officers in standby match perfectly, then first officer should be pilot flying until you can get squared away. So it's important to, of course, understand the lights and what are the messages and what they mean. And remember, you're not going to be alerted with the master caution system. So you have to really make sure that you include the PFD and scrutinize whatever you see on the PFD often, in case you do get a message. The other message is the alt disagree, and the alt disagree indicates the captain's left and first officer's right altitude values disagree by more than 200 feet for more than 5 seconds. The alert is shown on both PFDs and does not indicate which altitude value is erroneous. Again, you have a standby, integrated standby flight display that we just looked at, that is basically raw data from the aux pitot static system without going through the ADIRUs, which are computers that take a lot of information and send it to your primary flight displays. So know your systems and know what they mean. Now remember, the AOA disagree and the IAS disagree will take you straight through to memory items, and you've got to do the memory items of the unreliable airspeed. Important. All right, so that is just an overview of what we're going to be discussing in later on in the QRH in the next video. We're going to do airspeed unreliable, and we're going to break it down into different scenarios. We're going to break it down into a scenario that I've got up on screen. We'll talk about it later, and which is probably the more favorable of all scenarios. There are many scenarios. Now, if you notice at the very end of the checklist, which you don't get to, especially if you're using an IQRH, you don't even know it exists unless you know your airplane and know your manuals. The paper copy, you may get to it sooner because of turning the pages. You're doing whatever your company SOPs say. Some airlines use the paper copy on board and some use the I copy. So when you're reading the I copy, you will not even see, in many cases, the dash lines here that you can see on the paper copy. On the I copy, you may only see, depends on how it's set up, but you may only see a few of the items, and you've got to scroll to see the dash lines, which means that's the end of the memory items. So when you're studying, may I suggest that you study with both your I copy from your iPad and your QRH hard copy, which is a PDF file that we're looking at now, side by side, so that you know what to expect on the airplane. So let's go back to that last page, which I really think could have been placed near the beginning of the checklist. I'm not here to change Boeing's methodology on this. I'm just a pilot and a user, And I'm trying to help everybody understand that you've got a lot of incredible information at the end of the checklist. Now let's just read it. One or more of the following may be associated with unreliable airspeed or Mach indications. A difference between the captain and the first officer's airspeed indications. Well, we had a look at that as directed by the message that directed us to go, if we're using our head, directly into the memory items. IS disagree. Speed and altitude information not consistent with pitch, attitude, and thrust setting. So you may have a pitch setting on takeoff for between 15 and 17 degrees of pitch with toga power, but you may have an airspeed that is decreasing or something that's not right. Blank or fluctuating airspeed indication. Continuous or intermittent stick shaker. IS disagree. We talked about it. ALT disagree. By the way, if you get an ALT disagree, the checklist says if it's in combination with an IAS disagree, then go to the unreliable airspeed memory items. It doesn't say memory items, it says checklist. So you've got to use your head and understand that when you go to a checklist that has memory items in it, you've got to do the memory items first before you do the checklist. That's a discipline of airmanship. So remember that. The ALT disagree in combination with the IAS disagree directs you directly to the unreliable airspeed memory items. Okay. Speed failure flag, a speed limit failure flag, an erroneous minimum speed bars, erroneous maximum speed bars, in view when they shouldn't be in view, airspeed low oral, airspeed low, airspeed low, airspeed low PFD indications on one side, overspeed warning, erroneous flight director pitch command bars, radome damage or loss. The angle of attack disagree alert is shown. One or more of the following flight deck effects can occur. Erroneous pitch limit indicator, wind shear alerts, auto slat operation. So a lot of very strange things could happen when you if you have something on board the aircraft that's not right. And I really think that extra information could have been somewhere in here. That's just my feeling. Anyhow, I pointed it out to you so that you will know. In history, we're told, well, we don't get multiple failures. Well, you can get multiple failures. You can have runaway stab, and you can have unreliable instrumentation all at the same time, which could have happened on one of those 2 fatal flights 2 years ago. All right, so this will be the end of video number 3. In video number 4, we'll get right into different scenarios of airspeed unreliable. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.